And we're in the midst of a really challenging season and time in our world. And it's so important for us to remind ourselves that God is with us, God is strengthening us, no matter what we face or what we go through. And we can always receive the encouragement from Him. Just turn to Him, and that He will, the God who brings us to it will bring us through it. Amen? Amen. Well, we want to welcome those worshiping with us online and those at our Aldershot location. It's great to have everybody with us today. And I do want to talk about those seasons, those times in our life when we face challenge and hardship, dark days. It's in the midst of those times that we often try to overcome those or escape those as fast and as effortlessly as we possibly can. We want to remove the hard. We want to get to our comfort zone as fast as we can. However, that's not always the best thing for us. I think we need to learn to live in the discomfort zone. How many of you remember last September when I told you about Carl the caterpillar? Do you remember that? For those of you who weren't here, or maybe I'll refresh the memory of some of you, we were vacationing this past summer, and in the beginning of August, we found this giant caterpillar. This is my daughter with it, and I've never seen anything quite like this before. And through quick research, we discovered that this caterpillar turns into something called the imperial moth. And you can take this and put it in a container with some dirt and watch it transition. So that's what we decided to do. And sure enough, a couple of days after we did that, Carl transitioned from this giant caterpillar gorging and feasting on leaves and food to a small version of its former self. It went into what's called a pupa, that little purpley brown thing in the middle, and shrunk right down and became hard. And we likened this to the transitions in our lives, that sometimes we go through transitions, we go through circumstances and hardships, and it's difficult. And we relate to that. It's more difficult than we thought it would be, and it takes longer than we thought it would take. And that was one of the issues with this illustration, is I was waiting for Carl to break out of the pupa so I could inspire everybody, you'll make it through your transition, And Carl was just taking his time. So I told the illustration at the end of September, and he still had not broken out. And so I was like, man, I had to show like a stock photo of what an imperial moth would look like, because it couldn't actually show you Carl, because he was still hanging out in the pupa, pretty comfortable. And so we waited and waited. I've had a number of you ask, so what's happened to Carl? Did he actually break out of the pupa? So I'm going to give you an update today, okay? And because here's the thing, I've got some good news and some not so good news for you. So Carl did finally break out of the pupa just last month. Only a few weeks ago, it was 6 months. Now, how many know sometimes your hard seasons, your dry seasons are a lot longer than you thought they'd be? And it makes a long transition, a long version. And we were wondering if he was alive, and our friends, and we would poke him every once in a while with a stick, and he'd kind of wiggle a little bit. We're like, okay, he's still alive. And finally, he broke out of it. So I'm going to show you a picture of Carl after he broke out of the pupa. You're going to see the not so good news in a moment. So there's Carl. The not so good news, you see the bottom of the wings? They didn't fully develop. Here's why. Because the previous picture, we had the pupa sitting on top of the dirt. What happens when they get to that stage is they actually use the ability to wiggle, and they dig deep down into the ground. It saves them from predators. Now, we weren't going to be predators, so we just set them on top. We didn't want to make it harder for Carl than it needed to be. It turns out that we removed the resistance that he needed to become fully developed. Carl needed the heaviness of the dirt. He needed the challenge. He needed the struggle in order to fully develop. And friends, in our life, it's the same. And so often we actually need the hardship, we need the challenge, we need the difficulty, and we want to remove it all too quick, but sometimes your business needs that hardship to actually become lean and mean like it needs to be. You need the challenge physically and financially. We need these challenges in our life. And if you've ever wondered why we go through some of the hardship and difficulty we go through, the verses we're going to look at today are going to give us some of those reasons why and what we do as a result. We're continuing our series today called As a Result. We're looking at some of these different portions of Scripture that have this phrase. We're realizing if we make some small, subtle, simple changes in our life, it can lead to tremendous results in other areas. If you want to turn in your Bibles to 2 Corinthians chapter 1, we're going to look at a portion, a few lines from a letter that Paul the Apostle wrote to the Corinthians. Scholars believe he wrote up to 5 letters to them. This is 2 Corinthians we're going to look at. The first letter in Corinthians, Paul called his tearful letter. It's because he was confronting a number of immoral things and sin and conduct and stuff, and it was kind of a confrontational letter. This letter, at least in the first 9 chapters, it's different than that. Paul is encouraging them. He's wanting them to know that He's got their back. He's supporting them. He's still with them. He's also reminding them of God's call for their life and His purpose, and that no matter what happens, hardships, whatever comes, they're in it together. Listen to what he says. All praise to God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. God is our merciful Father and the source of all comfort. He comforts us in all our troubles so that we can comfort others. When they are troubled, we will be able to give them the same comfort God has given us. For the more we suffer for Christ, the more God will shower us with His comfort through Christ. Even when we are weighed down with troubles, it is for your comfort and salvation. Now, the Bible has a lot to say about challenge, hardship, difficulty. And even though that's true, it's surprising to me that some well-meaning Christians will develop a theology that kind of tells us that we can avoid suffering and avoid difficulty and even avoid sickness. And they seem to forget or realize that Jesus Himself faced a lot of suffering and a lot of hardship and a lot of challenge. They seem to skip over verses like this that Jesus Himself said, "Here on earth you will have many trials and sorrows, but take heart, I have overcome the world." Jesus said it's going to be tough. It's going to be really tough for all of us. We're not exempt from it. We reminded ourselves last Sunday, Jesus said, if you want to follow me, you got to take up your cross and follow me. And the last time I checked, the cross is not comfortable, right? It's sacrifice and death. It's difficult. And Jesus is saying, will you follow me wholeheartedly? Will you be willing to do whatever it takes? And we were reminding ourselves last week, we will. We will sacrifice. We will give. We will serve. We will go to do what Jesus calls us to do. Now, why do we have this hardship? Why does God allow this? Well, Paul is trying to encourage us and make us realize that even when we're weighed down with troubles, it is for your comfort and for your salvation. You say, well, how can being weighed down with troubles be for my comfort? How can being weighed down with troubles be for my salvation? Well, here's why. Because what God knows is true about all of us throughout history, God knows is this, that when we're comfortable, we're vulnerable. When we're too comfortable, we become vulnerable. And this is really difficult in our North American society because everything is geared toward comfort. Everything we do is about how to be more comfortable. We want to buy more comfortable couch, more comfortable shoes, more comfortable bed. We want to make ourselves more comfortable than we were yesterday in all kinds of areas, right? Now, I remember when drive-through banking came in. I was like, I can't believe how lazy we are. We won't even get out of the car to go into the bank anymore. I'll tell you, I'm really happy to sit in the comfort of my own living room and on my couch to do all my banking. I can't remember the last time I walked inside a bank. Like everything in our world is like, how many of you remember when you used to have to get up off the couch to change the channel on the TV? Anybody as old as me? Remember that, right? Now you got a remote for absolutely everything. Like back then, if you didn't want to get up off the couch, you just watched that documentary on how to make paper. Like even if you didn't want to, that's just what, now we can sit in the comfort of our couch and just, go online, do our banking, do our shopping, watch TV. Pretty soon, if you want a snack, you're just going to say, hey, Google, make me something, and your robot's going to bring you a nice roast beef and provolone sandwich, right? You're just not going to have to get up off the couch at all. The problem with that is when we're too comfortable, we're vulnerable. Think about it. Think about the last time that there was a holiday Monday or something and you slept in and then you had a leisurely breakfast and you sat on the couch and you binge watched Netflix. Is that the day you thought, man, I got so much energy, I'm going to take on the world, I got this, you're accomplishing all kinds of stuff? No, I mean, not for me anyway. Those are the days when I'm lazy and I feel a little extra sore and I'm kind of a little grumpy. Those are the days when I'm too comfortable. Ironically, I'm actually looking for ways to make myself more comfortable. We become vulnerable in those moments. When I'm too comfortable, those are the times I sit down instead of stand up for what's right. Those are the days I become negligent instead of diligent. I consume instead of give. I stare instead of share. In those moments, we're vulnerable, and that's what God knows about us. And Jesus was constantly challenging people who were too comfortable. He troubled the comfortable, and he comforted the troubled. See, because you might look at this verse and you might say, yeah, well, doesn't it say that God is the God of all comfort and that's how we find our comfort? Yes, but there's a difference between being comforted and being comfortable. God gives us comfort not to make us comfortable, but to give us comfort so we can continue to walk through the hardships and trials that we face. He gives comfort to those who are in the midst of deep waters so that you can keep walking through deep waters, not so that you can be lifted out of those deep waters and sit on the beach and get a tan and be lazy. And God sees you. He knows if you're going through a hardship and trouble. He understands what you're facing. He has not abandoned you. He has not forgotten you. He is not unaware. He is with you. I heard someone say recently, God doesn't say, come to me, all you who are crushing it and living your best life, and I'll give you rest. He says, come to me, all you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Is rest important? Absolutely. But not so that we just continue to get lazy, to make ourselves more comfortable. Rest is important so we gain the strength to continue to back in the midst of the hardship and continue to face what it is. And so whatever it is that you're going through, know this, God is with you, he sees you, and you can come to him. Just because you have hardship and trouble in your life does not mean that God doesn't see you or know you. He says, come to me. Come to me and I'll comfort you. Come to me and I'll strengthen you. Come to me and I'll guide you and I'll help you through what you're facing. Because if we just try to avoid it all, we get weak and vulnerable. And what God knows is that when we do that, we will not be strong enough to be able to handle the attack from the evil one. Like there is an enemy who goes around like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. He wants to steal, kill, and destroy your purpose in your life. And if you don't think that there's an enemy, then you're going to be blind to his schemes and his tactics. And I'm starting to wonder and think if one of the enemy's tactics is to make us so comfortable that we become lazy and we're not able to handle and stand up for what's right in the midst of a world that's going wrong. One of the reasons why God allows us to go through this hardship and struggle is so that we can be strong and we can continue to do what God has called us to do. The other reason, Paul shows us, is that he comforts us in all our troubles so we can comfort others. When they are troubled, we will be able to give them the same comfort God has given us. I'm going to invite Pastor Holly to come. She's our Director of Community Engagement. She's going to tell us about a new partnership that we're developing with Kerr Street Mission and some other churches called the Neighborhood Care Network, an intention to walk along more intentionally with people who are in need.
Well, it's great to be here this morning with you, church. People all around us are in crisis, aren't they? And in our community, I found that we are so good at hiding our challenges. We are really good at putting a great face on. But if we take a closer look into our community, we will see that 13,000 people are living in low-income homes, which are very, very hard to get into. So many people are living in places that they cannot afford. We will see that in Burlington, the food bank served over 8,400 people, and 3,400 of those were children last year. We will see in our community that mental illness is actually on the rise. We will see that addiction and relationship crisis are dividing families. And we will see that many people are just living beyond their means and are drowning in debt. All around us, there are people in need and in crisis. And we believe that God has called us as a church to reach out, to engage compassion, and to show the love of Jesus. And so we have many ministries in our church that are around compassion, like the food bank, like Share Noel, like community dinner. But in many cases, these great ministries, which we need to continue to support, sometimes they feel like we're putting a little tiny Band-Aid on an open, gushing wound. And so as a church, we sat back and said, God, what can we do? How can we help? Where are you leading us to go? And we really believe that God is calling us not just to give a hand out, but offer a hand up. And what I mean by that is a handout sometimes looks like food or giving money or benevolence. But a hand up says to someone who is in crisis, let me help you out of your situation, and let's help move you to a more sustainable and healthy situation. Wouldn't that be amazing if we could see that kind of care? And so we have just soft launched in September 2019 Neighbor Care Network. And you'll see here that it is in partnership with Kerr Street Mission and other churches in our region. And is what Neighbor Care Network is. We want to come alongside individuals and families who are in difficulty and distress. And we want to help them identify and access resources that are already available in our community. But when you're in crisis, sometimes it's difficult to access what is available. And we want to help people move to a more sustainable and healthy situation. Now, we launched in September, and our team has been busy just from word of mouth working with people. Our team of 7 is actually full right now. All of our team members are working with participants who are facing deep distress and crisis. And so we're in need of more team members to join us as we reach out and engage our community and engage compassion. We recognize that 1 in 4 people who are facing crisis are willing, ready, and able to take that step towards a more sustainable and healthy situation. So it's difficult, it's messy, it comes with some challenges, but we believe that this is where God is calling us to be as a church, to step into the difficulties. We believe that Jesus came to bind the brokenhearted. He was intentional, and he wants to restore and bring care and healing to people's lives. And so I just thank you this morning for the opportunity to share, and we're just excited to see what God is going to do through this ministry.
Will you show some appreciation to Pastor Holly? Yeah, so as she mentioned, we just soft launched this in September, and all our team members are full. And so now that we're going public with this, we know that we're going to have a larger demand. We already have, just even from the first service today. So if you have a background in social work, or you have a compassionate heart, or you've been through challenging times, you made it through, we'll care for training with you and help you, but you can help us support. The other way you can help us support this ministry is by directing people to the ministry. We want to create sustainable help for people. And I know there's so many of you that are so generous, you will give money or give things to people who you encounter that have need. And that's fine, but we encourage you to encourage them to walk through the program with us so we can help make systemic change and systematic change for them and with them. And then you encourage them and support them along the way. This is one of the reasons why God allows us to go through challenge and hardship, so that we identify with other people. If you don't walk through a hardship and a challenge, then it's really hard to understand what somebody else is going through. God allows us to do that so we can use the comfort, the strength, the skills we receive from God ourselves, and we can pass that on to other people to help them, so that we ultimately can patiently endure suffering. Now, that's another thing that we have a hard time with, right? We can sometimes endure suffering and hardship. We just don't endure it very patiently. We impatiently endure it. I want to tell you about something that I've been working on personally to try to help myself with this. I'm going to tell you something that if you've been around here for any length of time, you probably already know this. I'm not going to shock anybody, I don't think, but I like to be prepared for everything. I'm like one of these guys that I want to know every angle and every piece of information before it happens. So my brain is one of these brains that just doesn't shut off. I'm constantly and voraciously working through every possibility, every combination of everything that ever could happen. And that's helpful in some ways. I call it being vigilant. I'm vigilant about many things, and that does help me in so many ways, organizationally and personally, relationally. It's great. But sometimes what can happen for me is I not only am thinking about things that matter, but I actually start to overthink, and I become what I call hypervigilant about things that don't matter. I overthink. And so I did a little research to try to figure out how I can deal with my overthinking. Holly laughed at me because she was like, you were overthinking about your overthinking and trying to prepare about your overthinking. I was like, which is kind of me, But one of the things that really comforted me and helped me as I did this, I read a University of Michigan study that helped me realize I'm not alone. That 73% of people ages 25 and 35 are overthinkers. And in every other age category, it was over 50%. So more than half of us overthink issues. More than half of us have this kind of challenge. Now, why is that the case? Well, a doctor by the name of Robert Burton, he's a neurologist, and he wrote a book called Where Stories and Science Meet. And he said the reason is because whenever there's a gap in information, we want to fill it with something. Even if it doesn't make sense, even if it's not true and we don't have verifiable information, we want to fill it with something. And when we do, there's actually a dopamine response that makes us feel better, even if it's a negative situation. And overthinkers, we think we're doing ourselves a favor by overthinking something, but it actually is a dangerous game that leads to anxiety and negative thoughts that actually spiral. And so you've probably experienced this. I certainly have experienced this. It's something like this. You send an email to that client for a proposal, and you don't hear back. Or you send that email out to the coworker, and you don't hear back right away. And then you start to wonder, right? Maybe you don't hear back for the day, and you don't give it too much thought, but then that evening you're kind of, I wonder why they didn't respond to me. Next morning, you still don't see anything. So what do? You go to trash, and you go to junk mail, and you see if that, if it got caught in there, and you start to think about it more and more as the day goes on, and then you start thinking, well, I wonder if it would be, weird for me to call them. Like, is that inappropriate? Or should I text? And then you start going, well, maybe, I offended them somehow. So then you go back and reread it. How many have ever reread a text like a day later, right? Like, what did I do? What did I say? Why? I don't know. I don't know what's going on. Maybe they're upset at me. Maybe, they're going to give the job to somebody else. Then I'm not going to make quota for the quarter. Then my boss is going to be upset at me. Then I'm going to lose my job. Then we're going to be out on the street, right? And then it spirals. We overthink all this stuff. We do this with all kinds of things, right? We do this about when you're buying a house, like we put the offer in, they're going to go with somebody else we haven't heard yet. We're going to lose that house. Then our kids aren't going to get into that school. Then they're not going to get a job. Then they're going to live with us forever. It's just going to be awful, right? So there's just all these things that just kind of spiral and spiral and spiral. And so what do we do? How do we stop that overthinking? There's another book written by a woman named Deborah Grayson Rigel called Overcoming Overthinking. I thought these 3 things are really simple but really helpful in order to guard against this. She says, separate facts from interpretation. Recognize what are actually factual and what you're kind of interpreting and reading into things. Also, call yourself out on storytelling, where you just say, I'm making it up right now. I have no basis for this. I'm just totally making it up. And third, consider other possibilities. So where that looks is that's like, okay, when I sent the email and you start making it up, you think, oh man, maybe they're going with somebody else and I'm going to lose the contract, lose my job. Then you go, well, hold on a second. What are the facts? What do I know? What really went on? How did that relationship develop? Why am I concerned about that? Call yourself out on storytelling. This is complete conjecture. I have no basis for this story. And then consider other possibilities. Like maybe they had to, report to their boss. Maybe their boss hasn't got back to them. Maybe they had computer problems. Maybe they're away on vacation. Maybe they're sick. Maybe there's other plausible, reasonable explanation about why this has happened. My point is this: we've got to stop and ask ourselves, what story am I telling? myself about my hardship? What story am I telling myself about my situation? What story am I telling myself about what's going on right now? Now, we know men and women tell different stories about what they're facing and what they're going through. These often look different. I'm going to show you a video about a conversation between a husband and a wife. Now, before we look at this, look, I understand this doesn't mean all men and all women think like this, okay? I get it. But watch this video. We might relate a little bit to it.
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me. And I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head. And it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
See, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See,
out.
you're not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like, there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you.
Ow! Come on, if you would just...
Don't.
Try to see things my way.
Now, I'm not saying you can relate to that. I love my favorite line in that where she says, and all my sweaters are snagged. Like all of them. You know, it is interesting actually where she's complaining about him not listening to her, but she's not listening to him either, right? And maybe we can identify, we got to ask ourselves, what stories am I telling myself? And look, it's not that we got to just completely let all our hardships happen and just, sometimes you're going through things, you just need to fix it and get out of it. I'm not talking about us being sadistic and liking the pain and the challenges that we're in and not doing anything corrective about them. What I am saying is we need to ask ourselves, why am I going through this really? What is my perspective going to be? And how am I going to respond to this in the midst of this situation? Epictetus said, it is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. I heard a story about an elderly grandmother and her granddaughter had come over to the house one day, and she was looking really beaten down by life. And so the grandmother asked her, what's going on? What's wrong? And she said, I just been going through this hardship for so long, and I just don't know if I've got the strength to make it through. So the grandmother invited her into the kitchen, had her sit down at the table and just tell her more about what she was experiencing, what she was going through. And the grandmother went over and put 3 pots on the stove, and she put carrots in one in boiling water, and then eggs in another, and then coffee beans in another. Granddaughter didn't really know what was going on, and after a while, the grandmother took the stuff out, put it on a plate, put the coffee in a cup, and brought it over to the table. And she asked her daughter, which one are you? And the granddaughter said, what do you mean? She said, grandmother poked at the carrots and the egg and kind of pointed to the coffee cup and said, which one are you? Like the carrots were hard and unrelenting at first, and then they went into the boiling water and they became soft and mushy. And the eggs were soft on the inside, but went into the boiling water and they became dry and crusty and kind of hard. And the coffee beans went into the water, and they actually turned it into something else enjoyable and a blessing. Which one are you? This story, this illustration doesn't solve our problems, but it does help us take a look at our situation and give some perspective and say, what am I going to be? Am I going to allow my circumstance and my situation to really affect me negatively? Or am I going to turn it around and see positive possibilities in this? Am I going to find comfort and strength from God so that I can help others find comfort and strength from God. When we go through these hardships and these difficulties, we do that so that we can grow strong and we can withstand the attack of the enemy. We go through this so that we can comfort others and identify with others and what they're facing. But also, Paul tells us, we do this so that we don't rely on ourselves, but we rely on God. Look what he says. We think you ought to know, dear brothers and sisters, about the trouble we went through in the province of Asia. We were crushed and overwhelmed beyond our ability to endure, and we thought we would never live through it. In fact, we expected to die, but as a result, we stopped relying on ourselves and learned to rely only on God who raises the dead. Sometimes we go through these hardships and difficulties to remind ourselves that we don't need to rely on ourselves, that we've got God with us and we can rely on him. That you've got God with you in the midst of whatever circumstance you're facing. And he's a God who actually raises the dead, that nothing is too difficult for him. That you can find strength through your journey because God is with you. And here's the great thing about that. It's not because you've earned it, not because you're good enough, not because you're smart enough, not because you've got it all figured out. It's simply because of his love for you. Here's what I was thinking about this week. That often we think about our relationship with God as a contract. That if I do certain things, then God is going to do certain things. But we don't have a contractual relationship with God. We have a covenantal relationship with God. That if your relationship with God is based on a contract, then the law enforces it. But if you have a covenantal relationship with God, then his love enforces it. You can stand on the promises of God's love, that what you go through and what you're facing, he will care for you because he loves you. He sees you, he knows you, he cares for you, and he's good. So that if you need wisdom in your situation, you can ask him. He has promised, I will guide you along the best pathway for your life. I will advise you, and I will watch over you. In the midst of the hardship and the struggles and the difficulty you go through, you can trust in God to give you strength. You don't have to just be strong enough to make it through yourself. God has promised that the Lord is good, a strong refuge when trouble comes. He is close to those who trust in him. Somebody needs to say amen to that. If you turn to God and trust in him, he promises to strengthen you, to care for you, to protect you, to be a refuge. You can rely on God, not because you've been good enough or ticked all the boxes or showed up at church enough. But we can remind ourselves, if you sinful people know how to give good gifts to your children, Jesus said, how much more will your heavenly Father give good gifts to those who asked him? We've got a generous God who cares for us, sees us, watches over us. And I got to remind you today that God is with you. In every journey, in every challenge, in every struggle, in every situation, God is with you. He is your refuge and your strength. He is an ever-present help in trouble. He is your healer. He is your strength. He is your God. He watches over you. And even though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you protect me, you strengthen me, you comfort me. Surely your goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. I'll dwell in the house of the Lord forever. God is with you. He watches you. And he protects you. And in that, we can live in the discomfort zone because we know God's got purpose. We can live in those situations because God's got provision. He watches and rules and overrules, and in him we can trust.